Hello. Welcome to the Heavy Water Sabotage Raid with Mitch Utterback. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education here at the International Spy Museum. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really delighted to get a fresh and snowy perspective on the Gunnerside operation. We tell this story in our main exhibition, and we have some terrific related artifacts. So getting to spend an hour and a half exploring the topic on the 82nd anniversary of the mission really sounds like heaven to me. Our speaker, Mitch Utterback, is a retired U.S. Army Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel. In 2023, Mitch retraced the ski tracks of the heroes of Telemark. He'll tell you much more about that expedition. He's also going to screen the short documentary film, Hardangervidda.
Yes.
Did I do okay on that? All right.
Enough.
Which brings the danger and intensity of the mission to life. Enough from me. Take it away, dear sir.
Thank you,
I'm
Amanda.
excited.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll receive 3 units of continuing education.
No, you won't.
Please see Amanda about that. Thank you, those of you that are here in person, and thank you for everybody who has managed to sign in online, especially my mother. If you were able to do this, congratulations, Mom. Folks, we're here to talk about something that happened 82 years ago tonight. 2 years ago, I joined a mostly international group of military veterans to commemorate a mission of World War II that at the time was probably the most audacious small-scale raid with the highest number of consequences for the world. Known as the Heavy Water Sabotage Raid, it took place in the district of Norway called the Telemark district, and that's why we are talking about the heroes of Telemark, and perhaps some of you have seen the Kirk Douglas movie of the same name. Being a retired soldier, I am deeply imprinted with the requirement to have an agenda slide in all briefings, and Colonel Lindemann, this is the appropriate font, I can assure you. Like I said, on the night of 27-28 February 43, Norwegian Special Operations troops successfully conducted the most important sabotage mission to that point in the war. In February and March of 2023, I was there with an international group, and we followed in their ski tracks. We started at the same location they did, and we skied across Norway and crossed over to Sweden at the same location they did. So this show is the story of the heroes of Telemark, and this is also the story of our commemorative expedition 80 years later. Let's set the conditions, though, of why we went. On 9 April 1940, Germany invaded Norway by sea and by air. Norway held out for 2 months. Norway's army, though, was no more modernized than it was in 1915. However, they did have some equipment from the 20s. They held out, fighting the best they could, delaying the Germans. But as for those of you that are students of history, Germany's army in 1940 was, compared to the rest of Europe, was like something out of the future. It was 10 years ahead of everybody else, easily. Denmark held out for a week. They were invaded at the same time. Norway held out for, like I said, 2 months. But those 2 months allowed the king and his cabinet to escape, parliament to escape, and Norway to get their gold out of the country. But eventually they capitulated. The king had a government in exile in the UK. And for your next time you're watching Jeopardy and they say, which European country was occupied by Germany the longest during World War II? That answer is Norway. Norway was occupied by the Germans longer than any other country, from 9 April 40 until their surrender on 8 May 1945. The ratio, there was about 1 German for every 6 Norwegians at the height of the occupation. Why are we talking about the heavy water sabotage? Why was this important? Why the heroes of Telemark? Well, heavy water is it's a liquid. It's a type of water. It's a type of water where the hydrogen atom has a neutron attached to it. I'm taking you back to 8th grade science, by the way. Regular water hydrogen is just a proton and an electron. Add a neutron, you have deuterium. Add some oxygen, you've got deuterium oxide or heavy water. The Germans were working on an atomic reaction. The Germans decided to use deuterium oxide, heavy water, as the moderator in their reactor. Now, a moderator allows for the controlled splitting of uranium atoms so that enriched uranium and plutonium can be collected. This gentleman with the big head of hair in this photo is Werner Heisenberg. He was hoping to be the German version of Dr. Oppenheimer. He was to be the father of the German atomic bomb. He was a Nobel Prize laureate. If you win a Nobel Prize, you're called a laureate. Germany had the most Nobel Prize laureates at the time. In 1942, the Allies made the assessment, okay, Germany has the most scientists. They have access to the heavy water that's produced in Norway at this factory. They probably are going to get the bomb first. They are probably going to use it on London. We got to do something about it. By the way, heavy water was produced in Norway as a side effect or a benefit of their production of hydroelectricity and fertilizer. They had so much hydroelectric power that their scientists, realizing in the early 30s, man, these people are using this stuff called heavy water for atomic research. Hey, we can make it right here and sell it. That decision in the 1930s, in the future, put a bullseye on that part of Norway for the German invasion. So, the Allies, Churchill and Roosevelt realized we have to do something about it, and it was the Norwegians trained by the Brits, by the Special Operations Executive, that were given the mission to try to get into this plant and to sabotage it. From March of 42 until February of 43, 11 Norwegians were parachuted into Norway, onto the Hardangervidda, Europe's largest mountain plateau, so remote and desolate that all polar explorers to that point and to this day still train in this part of Norway. It's just a few hours from Oslo, but it's the part of the globe that most closely approximates the weather and the conditions of the North or South Pole. So if you're going to try to hit the North or South Pole, you go to the Hardangervidda. If you are a Norwegian saboteur who is going to blow up the heavy water, you parachute onto the Hardangervidda, because that's the hardest place to live and the most difficult place for the Germans to get you. We're going to talk about the three groups of men that parachuted in, that were all part of this mission. This map, though, shows you, look to the right and you can see where Oslo is. So this is just to orient you to the area of operation that we're talking about. Oslo on the right, that yellow splash is where the factory was in Vemork, the heavy water plant in Vemork, Norway. It was actually a hydroelectric plant run by the company called Norsk Hydro. And those three parachutes represent three separate airborne operations, Dan. My jump master buddy's in the back there. So Einar Skinnerland. Einar Skinnerland, he works near the hydroelectric plant. He actually is an engineer at the dam nearby from which the water is sent to power the turbines. He decides he's tired of living under German occupation. He joins a few other fellas, and they hijack a coastal steamer, and they get it to Scotland. He is one of the characters, composite characters that Kirk Douglas plays in the movie, by the way. So Skinnerland, he tells his bosses at the dam, I'm going to take 2 weeks off and go skiing. Something about Norwegians, they love winter sports. They love being outdoors in the wintertime. And even during the war, that's not going to stop them from going cross-country skiing on vacation. Schinnerland tells his bosses, I'm going skiing, but he actually hijacks the steamer. They get to London, they get to Scotland. He's debriefed, and the Brits ask him, where did you say you worked? What building, what factory do you have access to? Sir, would you be interested in returning to Norway to conduct espionage and reconnaissance for us? He's a patriot, and he says, yes, but how will I get back there? Well, we have 11 days. You'll do 10 days of espionage training, and you'll do 1 day of parachute training. Schinnerland's first and only combat jump during World War II was back onto the Hardangervidda after 1 day of parachute training. A true hero. So the Allies come up with a plan to send 2 gliders with 34 British saboteurs, paratroopers, sappers, combat engineers, British paratroopers specifically trained in demolitions. They're going to be towed in by gliders, land near the factory, attack across the bridge, and destroy it, and do their best to work their way 300 miles to the Swedish border. Well, they'll need pathfinders. They needed men to set up the landing zone and guide them in, and this is Operation Grouse. These 4 men were parachuted in on the date specified there on the slide, the 18th of October, to greet the gliders, bring them on in. Sadly, in November, on the night of November 17, 18, both of those gliders crashed. One of the bombers crashed, towing the gliders. Operation Freshman was a complete failure, complete loss of life. Any of the British soldiers that survived the crash of the gliders were captured by the Germans, interrogated, and then executed. Sadly, the news came over the radio by Morse code to Operation Grouse that Freshman has failed. Hold what you got. Stand fast. There will be a follow-on mission. They didn't know when. They had to survive. They almost starved to death until they finally killed a reindeer and ate every single piece of it. And they waited until February 17th when their teammates finally joined them, parachuting in Operation Gunnerside. The 5 gents sitting there, legs crossed, were the men that were specially trained to get inside the factory and blow up the means of heavy water production. Now, in the lower left, that Norwegian-looking Humphrey Bogart character, Knut Haukelid, he was supposed to go in with Operation Grouse, but he was fooling around with his .32 caliber pistol and training and shot himself in the foot, Shane. Thankfully, it was only a .32 cal. He recovered quickly enough, and by February, he was able to jump in with Gunnerside. Haukelid, by the way, finished off the German threat of heavy water, but that's another story. So, these 11 men eventually link up in late February. It is decided that 2 of them will stay on the Hardangervidda as radio operators to send the message back to London of whether the mission was a success or a failure. 9 of them ski down from the Hardangervidda and prepare their final plans. This is a topographic map of the area where the target is, and many people in this room and online can read a topographic map, and when you see that many brown squiggly lines that close together, you don't want to go there. That is indicative of a very, very steep and deep terrain. Just so you know, the Gunnerside guys were told, just go ahead and assault across the bridge like the British were going to try to. Klaus Hellberg, one of their teammates, said, let me go down and do a recon. Let me go check to see if that's feasible or not. So he skied to go have a look. He came back and said, we don't have to cross the bridge. We can climb down the gorge and back up. They said, okay. So as they made their final preparations, they were at a cabin. The saboteurs were at a cabin, prepping their equipment, prepping the explosives, prepping their weapons. And again, Norwegians were out skiing that day, And a young couple in a nearby hut needed a snow shovel. And they said, there seems to be a lot of grown men in that other hut. Let's go ask them if they have a snow shovel. Well, this gentleman picked the wrong hut to go to. He walked into the hut with the saboteurs. They didn't kill him. They recognized them that, hey, we went to school with you in Rukon. Don't go back to your hut. Stay in there for 24 hours. Don't say anything. And you never saw us. Well, in an interesting twist of history, that young couple, they got married. They had kids. They had a grandson. Their grandson, Oyvind Tangstad, was our guide on our trip 80 years later after this mission. And you'll see in the documentary film Oyvind talking about his grandfather meeting with the saboteurs accidentally. So here's an aerial photo taken in 1942 by the Royal Air Force. The oval is the suspension bridge over the deep gorge that the British sappers were going to fight their way across, that the Norwegians were told, go ahead and try that way, that they decided we're not going to do that. Klaus Hellberg was able to depart a cabin, ski down to the gorge, take his skis off, climb down, cross the frozen river, climb up the other side, get to the railroad tracks, turn around, come back, get to his teammates, all before it was time to go. So how's that for some reconnaissance? One-man recon to get back to amend the plan that they all quickly went with. And for those of you that understand the combat orders process, that's a pretty impressive recon and a pretty impressive fragmentary order to the op order that they were working off of. You can see that red arrow, it's the railroad tracks that Hellberg says, there's railroad tracks going right into the plant. The wind has blown the snow off of the tracks. We can use these tracks to get all the way into the plant. 2 years ago today, I took this photo on February 27th. This is the Mona River Gorge. That's how you say that A with a little zero over Mona River. Andy William wrote a song about it, by the way, Moon River. Meanwhile, the saboteurs climbed down. They crossed the frozen river. They climbed up the gorge, pulling themselves up hand by hand over small saplings of birch and pine, and they got to the railroad tracks. By the way, there were no guards in this gorge. There were no Germans. There was no barbed wire. There were no landmines, because the Germans believed, and as the German occupiers in World War II had hubris in abundance, and history, our World War II history, is often full of stories of the unit that climbed up the way that nobody thought they could. The 10th Mountain Division 80 years ago last week in Italy did the same. So the saboteurs did something that the Germans thought impossible. Climbed down, across, and up the gorge. Klaus Hellberg, by the way, one of the guy who did the recon, he did this sketch years later by hand and gave it to a friend. Steve loaned me this sketch, and here is Klaus Hellberg's hand-drawn sketch of the target. You can see on the left is the railroad tracks that allowed them to get in. So it's midnight. 9 saboteurs are on the tracks. They've gotten to the first locked gate. The gate's locked. One of their guys, Arne Kjelstrup, a plumber before he was in the Norwegian resistance, decided, we might need some bolt cutters. And then he thought to himself, it's better to have this and not need it than to need it and not have it. Even though his handlers back in Scotland said, that's too heavy, don't bring it, you won't need it. Being a plumber, he thought, I better have some tools. And guess what? They needed it. The gate was locked. They snipped the lock. They silently entered. There was another locked gate. They snipped the other locked gate and got inside. And then they waited. They knew that punctually the Germans will come on guard shift at midnight. But they also knew that this is cold. And let's wait 30 minutes for these guards to start feeling sorry for themselves and to pull up the collars on their coats and to pull their helmets and hats down and be thinking, man, well, I could thinking, damn, this sucks. That's what they're thinking in German. Scheiße. This is kalt. So the saboteurs waited till 12:30, and then they snuck into the compound. 4 saboteurs heading into the building, 5 saboteurs holding security positions outside, guns drawn, pointed towards the German guard shack, to the German barracks. Tommy guns pointed at every direction where the Germans might be coming from. This is the hydrogen building, it was called. 7 stories of steel reinforced concrete, heavy water production facility in the basement. The leader of the sabotage team, Joachim Ronneberg, was told, just like in the movies, right then, the door will be unlocked. No, it wasn't. The door wasn't unlocked. They were told there's an alternate method of entry into the building. There's an opening to the outside through which cables and pipes run. Plumbers call it a cable chase. Might call it a duct. So the sabotage team climbed through the rectangular opening in the outside of the building and slithered on their bellies, dragging a rucksack full of explosives behind them until they got to the room deep inside the basement, adjacent to the heavy water room. This rectangle is where they came out at. That white dashed line is actually a projection from the museum. The building is a museum now. But this is where they came out. And it was quite powerful to be standing in this spot 80 years to the hour that the saboteurs plopped down out of that opening. Once they were inside the concentration room, it's called, they told the Norwegian night shift guard, go stand over there and don't do anything. He, not knowing who they were dressed like British soldiers. The poor Norwegian guy who was so flabbergasted said, hey, be careful around this stuff. You could blow yourself up. Which they said, stand over there. That's why they were there. So there are 18 of these cylinders. Each cylinder is 5 feet high, about a foot in diameter, 9 on one wall, 9 on the other wall. There's caustic chemicals inside. It's electrified. It is the most evil still ever built. They are distilling deuterium oxide for the German atomic weapons program in these cylinders. Ronneberg and his teammates have pre-planned explosives about the size of a hot dog bun, plastic explosives about the size of a hot dog bun, with the blasting caps and the detonation cord already attached, applied to the bottom of each one of these cylinders. And I won't go into the complete demolition plan. Some of you can message me afterwards if you want to talk shop. But they connected everything together, laid it on the floor, and Ronneberg, he had been given 2 minutes worth of fuse. Now this is like the Clint Eastwood fuse, where you light it with a little stubby cigar and it burns and fizzes. Well, Ronneberg had 2 minutes of fuse, and he realized, 2 minutes? Man, in 2 minutes, a German could smell fuse burning, because some of you know, that's a very distinctive smell, fuse burning. So Ronneberg decided, let's cut it down to 30 seconds. Even though they're in the basement of this building. He told the night watchman, when I light this fuse, I need you to run upstairs, keep your mouth open. And the night watchman was thinking, why would I do that? And he told him about your lungs and your eardrums can be ruptured by the blast pressure if you don't have your mouth open. So I kind of think to myself in a historic little funny, I wonder how wide that night watchman thought he had to keep his mouth open, and how long did he keep it open? And was he panicking, thinking, is my mouth open wide enough as I'm running? Well, and also, people ask you, so how was Mitch's talk? What'd you learn? Well, I learned about deuterium, and next time I'm going to be around an explosion, I've got to keep my mouth open. Sounds useful. So, Ronneberg lights the fuse. The night watchman bolts upstairs with his mouth open. The saboteurs come out the door. They get outside, lay down in the snow. The explosion goes off and it sounds like a thud. The 5 guys on the outside thought, wait, this was a misfire. We didn't hear anything. We barely saw any. We didn't see anything because all the windows are painted out black. But they destroyed completely that room and every one of those cylinders. Waiting for a second, the saboteurs, the demo team, got up, withdrew, crawled underneath the windows of the German barracks, got back to their gate. One German came out in his wool underwear with the flashlight, German in wool underwear and his jack boots, one flashlight, looking around like, what was that? He was thinking. Human nature convinced himself nothing was wrong. Went back inside. Saboteurs continued their escape. They got through the gates. They closed the gates behind them. They got back on the railroad tracks. They got down. They got to the gorge. They climbed down. They were crossing the frozen river when the alarm first sounded. They climbed back up, climbed to the top of the ridge, got onto the Hardangervidda. Their lead was unassailable by that time. Once they got their skis on, no way the Germans were going to catch them. They skied out onto the Hardangervidda, got to a hut, and then the Old Norse gods rewarded them with 3 days of blizzard, which denied the Germans the opportunity to pursue. When the blizzard lifted, they continued their egress. Now, the plan was, those 5 gents that were sitting there from Gunnerside with their legs crossed in that black and white photo, the 5 of them parachuting in February, their mission, blow the plant and then ski to Sweden. So they did. They skied, putting on their white camouflage oversuits, as you see in this photo. 18 days, 368 miles. The 5 of them skied until they crossed into neutral Sweden. Now, Sweden was neutral during World War II. By the way, so was Spain and Switzerland. Like all the S countries were neutral during World War II. So Sweden was the safe haven for, the resistance. So they knew if they got to Sweden, they were going to be okay. They all made it. They made it safely to Sweden. They were never caught. They were never captured. The other guys of the mission stayed, conducted other operations. Some of them were brought back to England, retrained, and parachuted back in. But not a single one of these men that we talked about at the beginning completed just one mission and then sold war bonds the rest of the time. They all continued to make a contribution to the freedom of their country. So it was the Gunnerside guys, the 5 that had skied to Sweden, that I joined this group. This is a Scottish adventure travel company. A couple years ago, I was Googling I want to go on some World War II themed long-range expedition, and I found these guys. So this is a Scottish adventure travel company. They put on World War II themed expeditions, mostly in Europe. I was, myself and another guy were the oldest. The youngest fellow was a 28-year-old, the one who made the documentary filmmaker. So I never want to hear, I'm too old, I can't do this. Hey, seniors can do this stuff. Cross-country skiing is nothing more than sliding your feet on the snow. Come on. So we got to Oslo. We got picked up. We went out to Hotel Skjønarbu, owned by the Skjønarland family before, and did some training. That's me practicing pulling my sled, about to go downhill. Notice the bend in the knee. There's 3 things that you think when you're pulling a sled about to go downhill. Bend your knees, don't fall down, try to look cool in case somebody's taking a picture. You might put it in a PowerPoint. And that's me standing at the monument, and Vemork, the round obelisk, has the names of the saboteurs that were involved, all the men that you've heard about so far. So we struck off from the factory the night of 27-28 toward Sweden like they did. The first day we were carrying rucksacks. Then we picked up sleds. This is a screenshot from the video you're going to watch here shortly. Can you see why polar explorers go to Norway now to practice? Pulling our sleds right as the sun starts to go down. Now, there's some color phenomena. Everybody's heard of the northern lights, the aurora. Something you haven't heard of is how in wintertime in Norway, the colors change as the sun goes down. Blinding white. And then everything goes to black and white as the sun drops right below the horizon. And then, once the sun is down, everything turns blue. And you think your eyes are playing tricks on you. And then when it's finally totally dark, if there's moonlight or starlight, a phenomena that I think is way more interesting than the aurora is the snow, the ice under the snow will reflect the light from the stars and the moon back up through the snow. I walked outside of our hut one night seeing light under the snow, thinking, oh my God, the UFO did crash. And it is frozen under the ice, just like that Kurt Russell movie. So, I don't know what it's called, but and we don't have it in the video, but go to Norway, get outside at night in the snow, and look for that under the ice illumination. It's a bit freaky. Okay, a couple of winter warfare lessons learned. You can't stop for more than 10 minutes when you're at minus 25 Fahrenheit. You can quickly take off your gloves, get something out of your sled, drink some energy drink, and then you got to get your gloves back on. Another piece of gear advice. Back in the 1980s, the U.S. Army came out with the Gore-Tex jacket. Guess what? It's a damn fine piece of gear for polar exploration still, I'm here to tell you. Oh, and there's mine right there. Every night except one, we arrived at the safety and comfort of a hut. The 8 or 9 hours of skiing to a hut. And this is the natural color at night. This isn't a filtered photograph. This is that blue that I was talking about. Your eyes see this also. Here we are in one of the famous huts used by the saboteurs. And Oyvind Tangstad, Tank is telling the story of his grandfather and grandmother meeting the saboteurs. I tried to inflict as much suffering on myself as possible so that I could empathize and honor the saboteurs to the best of my ability. I knew that I didn't face risk of capture, interrogation, and execution. I probably wasn't going to starve to death, so I tried to do as much as I could like them, including taking reindeer moss, lichen that grows on the ground and on rocks, and peeling it off and putting it in my food. Because Operation Grouse had to survive on that for weeks at a time before they finally got that reindeer on December 23rd. So in my canteen cup with my little soup, I kept some reindeer moss in my cargo pocket like where Napoleon Dynamite kept his tater tots, and I would put the reindeer moss in my food, and guess what? It's like Norwegian kale. That's kind of what it is. It absorbs the flavor of whatever else you got in there, and it adds some substance to your meal. The Norwegian commandos that did this mission ran on mostly on two things when they had enough food: nicotine and caffeine. Nobody smoked on our trip, of course, but we did drink plenty of coffee, and that's me pouring a nice cup of joe right there in the hut. Just something for all you veterans out there and currently serving. You're done for the day. Nice cup of joe. It don't get much better than that. Our last night before we crossed into Sweden, we slept outside. Some of my teammates elected to put up tents. I elected to sleep in what's called a snow grave. And that is the fastest way, if it's not snowing and blowing out, the fastest way to get yourself in bed is to stamp a snow grave. That is, with your skis on, stamp out a rectangle in the snow. With your Sami knife, trim some pine boughs off a pine tree and lay the pine boughs in the snow. put down your ground pad, lay out your sleeping bag, and you've got a nice little trench that you're sleeping in. After about 20 minutes, your hands and toes are warm again because you've been wiggling them, and you can hear that night people still saying, "Is it the black pole or the red pole that we used to put this tent up?" And you're already in your sleeping bag. That next morning, that final day, we crossed into Sweden. The photo on the left is the Norwegian-Swedish border. Cut across the clear cut, and we went to that pile of stones, which was boundary marker 106. The saboteurs crossed into Sweden 80 years earlier, very close to that spot. We got picked up, we exfilled from that location, and we got brought back into Oslo for a 1 day of tourism. Karl Johans Gata is the main walking street. It's the most popular street, beautiful street, and again, we were rewarded with a nice snowstorm before we got there to make it even more scenic. This is Oslo Harbor. On June 7th, in 1945, King Haakon VII returned to Norway after his involuntary exile in the UK. So one of these slips shrouded in snow on this day is where the king returned, and this was the site of one of Norway's happiest days in June of 1945. This is one of the saddest places in Norway. This is the berm where members of the Norwegian resistance were executed by the Germans. It is a tiny version of their Arlington National Cemetery. The energy here is like Arlington. Many Norwegians that I spent time with can't get too close to this berm without walking into the energy and the wave of emotion that overtakes them. The inscription reads in Norwegian, "They fought, they fell, they gave us everything." On this site, Norwegian patriots were shot during the war, 1940 to 1945. Oslo really remembers its World War II heroes, and these are two statues in Oslo. One is Gunnar Sonsteby. That's his book, Report from Number 24. But just a couple months ago, a new movie was released on Netflix called Number 24. So look at Number 24, and it's the story of this Norway's most decorated resistance fighter in World War II, Gunnar Sonsteby. And Max Manus. Max Manus was a member of the resistance. His book, called Underwater Saboteur, written in the very early 50s, talked about his resistance activities. I was struck when I read Max's book about his admission of how terrified he was before every mission. He would throw up. He was so nervous, but he went to do it anyway. And he would say, "Oh, I got some bad eggs." But he went and did it anyway. He struggled deeply with PTS after the war also, and wrote about it openly in the very early 50s. So this is a book about a veteran, a soldier who did what he had to do, struggled with it afterwards, but wrote about it with complete candor and honesty. This is King Haakon VII. It is impossible for we as Americans, or for those of you not Americans in the audience here or online, perhaps you, if you lived under a monarchy or do now, you can understand, but King Haakon VII was so beloved by his countrymen for what he did not do when the Germans invaded, giving up his country. Every one of the saboteurs that I've researched has said, "My proudest moment of service during the war was when I was decorated personally by the king. Not when I sank the ship, when I destroyed the heavy water plant, when I blew up the railroad tracks. It was when I received my award from the king." They did it first for their king, then they did it for their country. Now we're going to start the film that our young filmmaker, Gregor, made. I didn't do the editing. There's a scene, there's a card scene where they say a couple of naughty words. Apologize in advance. Not to virtue signal, but I'm not much of a card player. So when they're playing cards, betting for matchsticks, I was in the bunk room, my bunk, in that sleeping bag with the red lens headlamp on, reading one of those books that I brought with me. That's a better way to spend the time. Let's watch the movie. It's about 20 or 22 minutes.
Man kan ikke trosse naturen. Man må tilpasse seg og innordne seg etter den. Naturen vil ikke forandre seg. Det mennesket som må tilpasse seg. En kald februarkveld i 1943 dro vi til Norge på et hemmelig oppdrag. Under oss fanns det ikke annet enn snø og is. Her lå Hardangervidda. Det største og mest øde fjellområdet i Europa. 6000 kvadratkilometer med nakne fjell. Det lever ingen mennesker på disse øde viddene. Bare ville dyr.
Your fingers are like covering the whole grid square. Yeah.
I know. 3 kilometers, 6 kilometers.
5 minutes, gents.
Beer company.
Snap brief.
It's all covered.
It will be a long day. This day will be 33.
We ski the whole way there.
We ski the whole
Oh
way.
yeah, okay.
My name is Øyvind Tangstad. I'm born and raised in Rjukan on Hardangervidda. I was there first time when I was 2 months.
For en gutt med interesse for friluftsliv, jakt og fiske, så var Rjukan stedet å vokse opp.
I first started learning about the story of the saboteurs from my grandmother. I remember those 4 local guys I wished to learn so I had the same mountain skills as them. We are going to do the same route that they went from Rjukan to Sweden, crossing Hardangervidda. The same cabins, the same struggle, to do the same as they did.
Herregud, hvor jeg elsker fjellene. Det er der jeg er lykkeligst. Det er der du kan leve og dø, og bare la verden utenfor leve sitt eget liv. Hvis vi hadde levd et helt liv kun for å oppleve en slik gjenkomst, så kunne vi ikke ha bedt om mer. Hvert eneste europeiske land falt i tur og orden under tysk herredømme. Men det var ett forhold Tyskland hadde oversett. Det ubeseirede pågangsmotet til tusenvis av menn og kvinner. Hvis vi kunne overgå dem i konstruksjon, ferdighet, overraskelser, dristighet.
look inside and see if you find more water cans?
Yes, certainly will.
Because you just have one?
Be all over the rash.
Det er julaften. Vi hører på julesanger på radiosenderen. Vi er tankefulle, og juleminner fra en lykkelig barndom flommer innover oss. Kanskje syns vi litt synd på oss selv. Eller kanskje vi tenker på våre nære og kjære. Og lurer på hvordan de har det. Noen begynner å synge She'll be coming round the mountain. Og andre sang vi pleide å synge i Skottland. Vi ble trent i høylandet, nær Vemork, blant noen av de mest øde fjellområdene i Skottland. Vi levde et bra og slitsomt liv ute i friluft. Det var hjort i fjellet, og elvene var fulle av laks. Vi kom godt overens med det skotske folk. De forstod våre særegenheter. You opened your homes and your hearts to us and gave us hope.
And Helvar said to him, promise me that you will take care of this hut and your children and your grandchildren. Children. So, because this is a big piece of history. And for me, it's quite a special family history.
4 ungdommer dukket opp på hytta ved siden av vår. En av dem, som hadde etternavnet Tangstad,
Grandfather
han kjente meg
knocked on
igjen.
the door, got pulled in, knocked in the stomach and went to the ground. And then Jens Anton Paulsson shouted, "Don't shoot, it is Kåre." Kåre is the name of my grandpa, and he was a classmate with Klaus Helberg and Jens Anton Paulsson. So
Tangstad fikk streng beskjed om å ikke fortelle noen. Han holdt løftet sitt.
It was about that time that grandma understood that it was something special going to happen, but she had no clue.
Kombinasjonen av uran og tungtvann kan gjøre det mulig for en atomreaktor å produsere plutonium. Det kan brukes til noen av de verste gjøremål som tenkes kan. Tungtvann ble kun produsert ett sted. Rjukan ligger en dyp dal, var omgitt av stupbratte fjell, så solen aldri treffer om vinteren. Beliggenheten til den store 7-etasjes fabrikkbygningen var som et middelalderslott. Bygget opp på det mest utilgjengelige stedet du kan tenke deg, beskyttet av stup og elver. Vi hadde med oss nok sprengstoff til å sprenge anlegget.
Just coming up on 12:30 now, 8 years to the day. The saboteurs would have blown the charges.
Kom det en eksplosjon. Vi hørte lyden av sirenene. Nå måtte vi komme oss opp i fjellene. Veien til fjellet var åpen.
To be in a storm on Hardangervidda is scary. It's minus 30, 40.
Den kvelden brøt det ut en av de verste stormene jeg noensinne har opplevd i fjellene. Hvert eneste steg var hardt arbeid. Det som holdt oss gående, var en gryende stolthet over å gjøre noe. Vinden ulte rundt hytteveggene.
Today we are stuck in a hut because of the weather. It's blowing around 18 to 20 meters per second, so we at least stuck here for 24 hours.
He's fine. He's full of. Are you in? Are you in?
He's full of shit.
That's it.
See, lads. You know when I sat down, it was a game of mathematics.
So you got a horseshoe up your ass, right? Now we know.
We are here, and we probably will be here during tomorrow too. The weather forecast is constant wind is increasing. So I don't see the point due to safety and snow damage. Frostbite.
The bar around. That's you'd have that, wouldn't you? The cabin. It's always just been through shat.
But if
So many divers.
So my wife
So
said,
one
"What
guy.
do a spark?"
When I first got into the North
Trying to kill me?
I don't mean Kate, my boss, Kate, he's my brother. I do Henry, do it for me.
So the only reason you're sitting is because the camera's on. Anytime the camera's gone on, Matt pissed.
The only reason he's sitting here because you think there's whiskey left.
Februar. Det har vært dårlig vær siden 27. desember. 12. februar. Nordvestlig storm. 13. februar. Storm. 15. februar. Kraftig snøfall. 17. februar. Sterk vind. 18. februar. Storm. 19. februar. Storm. 20. februar. Herregud, et forferdelig vær. 3. mars kommer kulde, sol, ro og perfekte skiforhold. Det er utrolig hvor langt man kan gå når man vil og må.
The last days is mental hard again. You have lost a lot of weight. Energy is slowly going down. The poke is stuck in some trees and it's more difficult to find the right path, and it's colder.
Matt, you've dropped some Toki bar wrapped around your pocket.
You cannot speed up because then you will sweat too much, and sweat too much you will freeze. You will get sick, and you don't have time to get sick on an expedition like this.
That's a prominent pond though, isn't it? Prominent feature. This pond here.
Yes, I think it's a small pond where we go on the left side.
Okay.
So
Let's do it.
What's happening?
We're gonna head off. We're halfway.
Vi gikk over fjellet i Sør-Norge, svingte av nord for Mjøsa og forsvant inn i de store skogene mot svenskegrensen. Da ting var på sitt mørkeste, trøstet jeg meg med et par linjer fra Kipling. Hold on, when there is nothing in you, except the will which says to them, hold on.
We reach almost our destination. We are close to the Retracing 106, where the Sabotage crossed. The guys are exhausted. It has been a rough trip, physical and mental challenge with the weather and the cold.
A little boy blew his hand up, smashing a dish around. So his father brought him to our little base. I had 12 men. We were embedded with 100 Slovenians. We decided to medevac, but before we did,
Tomorrow we're going to break camp, collapse all our survival shelters, leave the place as we found it, and head off to the crossing point 106 and commemorate the heroes. It's going to be a special day.
technology hasn't completely obliterated the need for waterborne.
Til slutt nådde vi grensen og kastet et siste langt blikk på moder Norge.
Well, Matt, pleasure's been all yours.
Right.
When you see what happened around in Europe or in the world now, it's still necessary to tell the next generation. A lot of people fight for freedom, and we have to take care of the freedom. You remember that the two bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, that's only these two times the nuclear weapons was used by human people. Let us hope that also governments and presidents in every country in the future will let it be and never use the atomic bomb.
In Rjukan, we are very proud of it that the local guys stood up in the war. It shows that if you have mental willpower, everything is possible. Stand up if your country is attacked for no reason, like what's happening in Ukraine now.
Først når friheten er tapt, blir man klar over hva den betyr.
that was the film, ladies and gentlemen. Could you tell a whiskey company was one of the sponsors? How about that for some product placement? That looked like a heavy glass bottle. I'm glad I wasn't carrying it. Folks, get out your phones and take a picture of this slide. These are all the places to watch World War II movies about Norway. The networks, the links. All the good Norwegian World War II movies can be seen on Tubi, Prime, Netflix, and YouTube. The most recent one is number 24, about Gunnarsson. There was some black and white footage in that documentary we just watched, which was a film made in 47-48 that contained several of the saboteurs playing themselves. And that is available on YouTube. In Norwegian, you can see Kampen om Tungtvangen. Amanda's filming a movie. Folks, we have, I'm grateful for you listening to this story of some young men that really carried more than their share of the burden during World War II. Men and women continue to carry burdens for their countries around the world, and we today have just remembered the heroism of a small piece of World War II history that's not known by many Americans. This is still taught in the schools in Norway. But they will not be forgotten, these men, because of what we've shared here today. So let's always think about those that have gone before us, that gave us the world that we live in. And as we all try to do the best during our time in the world, leave it a little better for who comes after us. I would now like to answer any questions that you may have, both from the audience online and here in the theater.
All right, I'm not gonna ask a question right off the bat, but I'm going to say that we do feature this in our covert action gallery on the 5th floor of the museum, and we have a sample of heavy water from Norsk Hydro, and we have one of those amazing winter camouflage suits that you can see, and some other cool stuff. And I also want to say we had the honor of having Gunnarsson here to speak, and it was a privilege of my life. So
Wow.
Now I'll let you ask a question.
Thank you very much for that talk. That was wonderful to see the film and the additional details around the operation.
Thank you, sir.
My question is regarding the status of the German atomic program. There's been some historical narratives that say that it wasn't that far along, but then others that sort of contradict that. I was wondering if you could, in relation to say the Manhattan Project, which we know much more about, I think, could you comment at all about how far along the German program was? Were they ahead of us? This was clearly a key part of their operation, but what was the overall status of their bomb development program?
That's a great question. Probably one of the best that I've ever been asked in the dozens of times I've given this presentation. We're at the Spy Museum. Sometimes intel, you got to execute with the intel that you have. The assessment by the analysts in 42, as I alluded to during my talk, said they got all the scientists, they got the heavy water, they're going crazy in Europe, they're probably going to nuke London. So they had to attack the heavy water production, a node. It was much easier to take out a node of production than maybe whacking Werner Heisenberg in Berlin. But the Germans were not ahead of us. But we didn't know that at the time. Their use of heavy water was the wrong moderator. Enrico Fermi at the University of Chicago used solid blocks of graphite to moderate the splitting of uranium atoms in his reactor, called an atomic pile, because it was a pile of black bricks. So they used the wrong moderator. They were never going to get ahead of us. They were also spending a fraction, tiny fraction of what we were across our entire country. Hitler thought that I'm going to win this thing just with conventional forces. That's nice to have. Keep going. So they probably weren't going to get the bomb first. We took the right path. We were spending more money. They had that World War II thing of the Nazi regime, hubris in abundance, and thought we're going to win this thing shortly anyway. But still, we had to keep working at it. We bombed that factory. There were civilian casualties, and then Knut Haukelid sank a ferry boat that had the last of the heavy water on it that they were going to move to Germany to make it safer. So there were civilians' lives lost right up into 44. But to wrap that question, to tie a bow on it, sometimes you got to go with the best information that you have and execute vigorously once you're on the ground. And history and the analysts will tell us, how that should have gone. That's a great question. Thank you for asking.
I'm doing something rare. I'm bringing the mic.
Oh, thank you very much. I would like to just build on that and add that what the Allies did know at the time is that the Germans had progressed very far on their rocketry program, and that they had the means of delivery. Should they have had a bomb, an atom bomb, they could have delivered it by rocketry. And that was something that was known, even though the finite progress of the development of the bomb itself.
Very good point. Two evil components. Had they matched, our history we'd be quite different 82 years later, wouldn't we? Had they gotten the bomb and got it on a V2 or a V3, which would have been their multi-stage intercontinental ballistic missile. And sadly, we might be standing up here. I'd be speaking in German, telling you about the glory of the V3 rocket. Anyway, thank God we're not at that point. Somebody often asks us, did you have those Huskies with you the whole time? I know you were. So the guide, Stein, with his Huskies, just joined us on the last day. So he joined us on the last day to guide us to the crossing point. So he had his Huskies with him only then. And one neat thing about Norwegian cross-country skis is they make special skis if you are going to ski with your dogs. Your cross-country skis don't have metal edges if you ski with your dogs. Now, Stein had on military skis, but to buy commercial skis like I have here, even the graphics on your skis for skiing with dogs have Huskies or Norwegian wolfhounds on them. It's pretty neat.
All right, before this gentleman asks, I have to mention after Mary's comment about the V2 rockets, we do have a white print, a diagram of the Nazi V2 weapons on display in the analysis gallery on the 5th floor of the museum. Okay.
Wow. Do you have any Huskies on display here?
Maybe just me.
Okay. Yes, sir.
More of a statement than a question, but the presentation was great, but I don't think what people realize is just how much it sucks and how hard it is to work in that environment, carrying that kind of stuff. I was just thinking, because I'm an ex-military guy, I've worked with Mitch, and just crawling up to the objective at night when it's that cold and doing that stuff is extremely, extremely difficult. And cross-country skiing in that environment for that distance is phenomenally, It's just incredibly hard. Every part of your body aches. Your hands are frozen, your feet are frozen, you've got no food. You have to melt snow for water. Just going to the bathroom sucks. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
And they were doing that for 8 freaking months, and that's monster endurance and drive.
Well said, Dan.
A question is, and this is more of why didn't they just think of flying some mosquito bombers or some Lancasters over and just blowing that thing to smithereens rather than, and ensuring that it was destroyed so they couldn't just replace those cylinders and start up production again, if you know.
Yeah. Well, they decided to do precision strike at the beginning just to take out the means of production. But it's actually shown in the movie. There's a couple of movies. But within 4 months, the Germans were back up to full production and more of the heavy water. So General Groves, 8th Air Force, bombed that place in November 17, 18. But it was in the basement. It's in literally 7 floors of steel reinforced concrete above it. We didn't have the bombs to get at it. It was buried too deep. Now, there is some destruction shown in the video. That destruction isn't from the bombing. It's from the late 70s when Norway tore that building down. For some reason, they decided to destroy it in the late 70s. In the 2000s, they industrially excavated it and turned it into a museum. So, Dan, bombing wasn't an option with World War II bombing methods available, but they kept trying to get at the heavy water itself, and that's why they wound up sinking it in the deepest lake nearby when it was all on the ferry boat. Thanks for that question, Big Sarge.
I guess would bring up another question is, there was I know about that ferry, the sinking. Was there another production plant, or did they get that one up and running again and produce more?
No, that was it. They had reproduced the facility in Germany, but you need heavy water to seed the process. So they were going to get the heavy water from Norway to seed the process to get it going. They never got it going.
Thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. I want to thank you, Mitch, so much. This has been incredibly riveting. We will be sharing this recording on our YouTube channel if anybody would like to see it again or tell a friend about it. And for those of us who are here in person, I think Mitch is very willing to let you come have a look at some of his gear. Thank you so much, Mitch.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Most of the stuff will be returning to Norway with me next month when I join another expedition helping lead it to commemorate the only American combat operation conducted by the Office of Strategic Services, Operation WWII. We'll be commemorating that next month in Norway on its 80th anniversary, and maybe you'll have me here in several months talking about that, Amanda. Thank you again for your polite attention. Let's remember those heroes that served before us. And thank you for your interest in a very important part of history that shouldn't be forgotten. Thank you, everyone.